Hello everyone and welcome to Writing to Persuade and Argue screencast. As you know, you will need to learn how to persuade and argue for your English exam. So I've decided to create this very short screencast to help you revise. I also feel that these skills are very important for any job that you might go into, whether it's media, teaching, whether you're a doctor or whatever you might want to be. So I just think you have to imagine, okay, that you're going to use these skills in your later life, and think about how great would it be if you could actually persuade everyone to agree with you. I think that would be absolutely amazing. So let's begin with the screencast. One thing that you will need to learn, if you don't know already, is a new acronym called TRAPPERS. Okay, we've decided to give this name to this acronym because obviously it stands for the devices, but really you're going to trap those grades if you start to use them in your writing. Okay, that's why I think it's really important to remember the name TRAPPERS. So it's really a name given for devices that work well in this exam. So let's look at them, and remember to take notes or pictures or whatever helps you to remember what trappers actually stand for. So trappers, first of all, remember the T stands for list of three, or threes in this case, and I've given an example there on the right hand side for you. So pandas are beautiful, cute and cuddly. Now it doesn't have to be three adjectives, it could be three verbs. Okay, it could be three nouns. It doesn't really matter as long as you are using a list of three somewhere. Okay, so that's called threes. Then the A stands for adjectives and adverbs, so friendly, softly, quickly, quietly, or quiet. And as long as you use these devices in your writing, obviously you will get the marks. Now, P's for personal anecdotes. I think personal anecdotes are very important because, especially when you're writing to persuade, you're really persuading somebody to believe in you. And really, what you need to do is to show them that you know what you're talking about. And one way how you can tell them that you know about something that you're talking about is if that happened to you. So, for example, this also happened to me when, such and such happened. So this only has to be a couple of sentences, or perhaps you might be telling of a story that happened to your friend. So really, it's something, a personal little story that you might want to include. Remember, it doesn't have to be true in the exam. You can make it up, but kind of make it sound a bit more realistic, okay? Then the next B is for polls and statistics. Remember, you need to use obviously percentages, or 1 out of 5 people agree, or whatever else it might be. Okay, so that's also very useful to remember when writing for argue and persuade. The next is emotive language. So it's language that you use which makes you feel a certain way. It could also be language that are normally feeling, so devastated, shocked. Can you feel shocked? Of course you can. So it's really a feeling. Okay, so I think it's really easy to remember emotive language. If it's a feeling, it's emotive. Rhetorical questions, these are questions that do not need an answer. So for example, if I ask you, do you want to die? Don't worry, I will never ask you this, but if I ask you, do you want to die, of course you're going to say no. Okay, you're not even going to probably answer it because it's a very silly question. Okay, and these just make you think. And of course, the S stands for sentence structure. So all these different types of sentences, we need to have long sentences for description, and of course, we need to have short sentences to make an impact. Okay, so let's look at what you need to do when arguing. Okay, so first and foremost, you need to remember is that arguing doesn't mean shouting over one another. Okay, you should be calm and calculated. So it doesn't mean whoever shouts the loudest will win. That's not the way it goes. So you will need to be logical. Okay, make sure that you structure your argument in some logical way. Make sure that you have counter arguments, explain your argument, but show that you understand both sides, because we don't want somebody who is obviously ignorant what they're talking about. So make sure that you counter argument, but stay true to the argument that you're agreeing with. You need to consider both sides. Of course, you need to use connectives. However, although nevertheless, okay, use of feelings should be kept at minimum. Just for writing to argue, I feel that sometimes if you keep using feelings, it's not really convincing that you know what you're talking about. So I would keep that at a minimum. Of course, include feelings, but make sure that you don't just keep using emotive language over and over again for argue. And of course, you need to make sure that you use trappers and different types of punctuation. So, for example, imagine that you received this question in the exam. So, argue that schools should only sell healthy food. Okay, so you know that your argument is going to be that you agree that schools should sell only healthy food. So of course you're going to start with explaining the health benefits. Okay, so perhaps that's going to take one long paragraph, and then you need to obviously include a counter argument. So you might need to include a counter argument in your second paragraph. For example, that could be you understand how some people might need a treat from time to time, and then you go back, okay, return to your original point. So you might say, nevertheless, okay, and then obviously continue arguing that healthy food should be sold in your school. Okay, so that's really all you need to do for writing to arguing. As long as you include trappers, rhetorical questions, list of threes, argument. For example, you might even want to include a personal anecdote of how perhaps you decided to eat fast food and you were sick. Okay, so that would be quite a good thing to do as well in your argument. So let's move on now to writing to persuade. Oh, before we move on, I forgot to include a little helpful tip that I think would be actually very helpful. You remember that in your exam you should never be offensive or insulting. You should never say, well, this is rubbish, I don't like this, okay? Instead, argue your point with using counter arguments rather than saying, oh, I hate this, and so on and so forth. So focus on the positives rather than the negatives. So let's move on to writing to persuade. Now this is very, very similar to writing to argue, but really the only difference is that you really need to convince that your opinion is the only one that matters. So you don't need to kind of look at counter arguments because this is your time to show that you have the answer to something that they're looking for, that you have the best opinion, and really you just kind of one-sidedly keep going with your argument, or with your argument. Okay, so what you need to do, you need to make sure that you use trappers. I would aim to use at least, use around 14. I wouldn't keep using statistics all the time, so every couple of sentences. I wouldn't necessarily say 14% of people agree or disagree or whatever else it might be. It just kind of gets a little boring. Then of course you need to make sure that you're staying positive. I would never focus on how awful the other idea is. I would kind of shift my focus on the benefits of my idea. I think, look at how amazing I am rather than look how rubbish somebody else is. Okay, that's just something that I would do. Just be positive. I would also be pushy and repeat myself. So obviously repetition would be a kind of a main language device. Also use personal anecdotes, show that this happened to you and you know what you're talking about. Of course, you need to be convincing, show that you're sure what you're talking about, use connectives, don't just keep repeating and, or then, or now. Obviously, you need to show the examiner how educated and how well you can write, so therefore use as many connectives as possible, and of course use different types of punctuation. So for example, exclamation mark, okay, how you're so amazed at your own idea, or perhaps rhetorical questions, of course, will have a question mark. Okay. So I have a little mini activity for you, and here you will have to spot the trappers that are used in these adverts. So all you have to do is just read the advert and of course then think about which trapper is being used. The first one, okay, picks up 5 times more women than a Lamborghini. The next one, third one, and the last one. So I'm going to pause, and when you've read all of these, I would like you to continue listening to the screencast, where we're going to quickly look at what you found. Welcome back to Writing to Persuade and Argue screencasts. So let's look at these mini activities, and of course hopefully you've had the time to read through them and pick out the trappers that have been using. So the first one is, I think it's Volkswagen, and it says picks up 5 times more women than a Lamborghini. If you said that they're using polls and statistics, and of course you might have said humor, you are correct. Really, obviously it is a bigger car, so therefore it can pick up more, 5 times more women, because I think a Lamborghini only has 2 seats or 4 seats or whatever it does have. So therefore, yes, of course, it's known fact that of course this particular car will fit more people rather than just women in it. Then the next one is, imagine having more motivation, ambition, self-esteem, perseverance and confidence. How great would you feel then? Okay, really, it's a rhetorical question. Of course, they don't ask you to tell them how you would feel. Of course, if you had ambition, self-esteem, and confidence, of course you're going to feel great. Now, the third one with the little doggy is of course rhetorical questions, and he uses two of them. So, how much do you love me? Okay, and then beside the coin it says this much. Okay, for just £1 a week, and it goes on. So really, it's using two rhetorical questions to grab your attention and make sure that you keep reading on. And the last one with Cheryl Cole, glam it, style it, and let it. Okay, of course, it's a list is free. Okay, so hopefully you were able to distinguish and find out all these trappers that have been used in these obviously persuasive adverts, which of course will make you donate or click into it or look at the advert. So let's move on. And the last thing that I would want you to remember when you're obviously revising for your exam is gap. Okay, if you've watched the previous screencast, you know what it's all about. If you haven't, I'm just going to quickly look at it together. So in your exam, the first thing you should do is make sure that you read the question carefully. Okay, once you read the question carefully, you will understand what the question is asking you to do. So I would make sure that I always write down in the corner of my paper gap, okay, what is the genre of the text? So really, the format, what kind of format will you be asked to write in? Is it a letter? Are you asked to write an email? Are you asked to write a leaflet? Perhaps it's a newspaper. Okay, then you need to think, if it's a newspaper, of course it's going to have a headline. Okay, if it's a leaflet, it might have bullet points. If it's a letter, it will need to have addresses. Okay, so that's the first thing you would do. Then of course you need to, before even picking up your pen to write your final essay or your final answer, you need to make sure that you look at the audience. Who is it aimed at? If it's for adults, then of course you're going to use formal language. If it's for children, you might want to use less formal language, okay? So you can modify the language they're going to use, okay? If it's for teachers, principals, then of course you're going to use extremely formal language, dear sir or madam, so on and so forth. And of course, the last is, what is the purpose? Why is it written? So, for example, it might be to persuade. It will say it might be to argue. In this case, you're going to have two, obviously to argue or persuade. Okay, so you need to make sure that you either highlight or write it down somewhere so you don't forget what exactly you're going to do. Okay, so that's GAP. Trying to remember this acronym as well. So we've come to the end of the screencast, and I do hope that you enjoyed it. So of course, if you watch my previous screencasts, you will know that this is what I always do. I would like you to think about one thing that you learned from today's screencast, and I would like you to either finish the sentence or just say it out loud. One thing that I need to remember from today's screencast is that use whatever, or it might be trappers or whatever else you have learned. Also, once you finish that, I would strongly encourage you to have a check out my blog and have a look at it, because there's obviously all these screencasts, and you never know what else you might find interesting there. And of course, if you ever need grinds or private tutoring, there's more details on the blog. I hope you enjoyed, and I hope you revise for your exams.